All right, so we are very happy to have you all with us today to discuss the education and the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus at 10. And I'm here to welcome you all to this meeting. And I'm Maura Fall, the Executive Director of NORAG. So we have an extraordinary panel and group of people to speak with you today. We're very, very happy to have Laura Frigenti's video message to open the session, and Alison Joyner, our Education and Emergencies Specialist and lead editor for this, is going to give us the overview before we hear from this panel a discussion of some of the pieces that were in this Policy Insights collection, one from each of the different sections that we have, plus we also have a youth advocate for education emergencies, followed by a question and answer session. We have 2 hours, so we hope that gives us enough time to really get into this topic and into the discussion, before closing with some words of wisdom from Faiza Hassan of INEE, who are our partners on this publication launch today. So those of you who know NORAG know that we carry out certain strategic activities with the hope that we will then be able to achieve our stakeholder outcomes. So if you take a look at the inner donut, the inner part of this double donut that we have, the first and most important principle that underpins everything that we do is to surface underrepresented knowledge. And then also we will broker policy dialogue, co-produce knowledge, as in this publication, and then share capacity and mutually strengthen capacity with our network members and our partners. And we do all of those things in order to support our stakeholders, who come from all of the different sectors that you could think of. First of all, to access the knowledge that they may need in order to get their day job done, to actually know what it is, and then be able to act with that knowledge, all the while amplifying that underrepresented knowledge and expertise. And we work in these 5 key strategic themes. And this particular publication, as will be no surprise to anybody, comes into the theme, how does equitable and quality education overlay and intersect with other SDGs? And that's highlighted for you on the screen there. And the NORAG network is over 6,100 members strong, 50% of whom are based in the Global South. And you can see the breakdown. Almost half of our members are in academia around the world. And we're also very well represented across all of the other different sectors for whom we do our work for in terms of our stakeholders. And you're very, very welcome to join the network through that QR code, or going to our website, and you'll see a sign up button at the top right of the screen. So really before I hand over to Laura, sorry, forgive me, on the slides, I think what's really important here in terms of the work that we're presenting to you today is the fact that NORAG continues to work on education throughout the Humanitarian-Development-Peace network. And we very much welcome you to go to our website to see all of the other work that we have done in this area and continue to do. And thinking through what we learned as we were putting this publication together, I think it really personifies, it incarnates the importance of being able to surface that underrepresented expertise, simply because we have a global policy agenda that is not being fulfilled. And at the same time as we see that, the problems and the stops and the starts that are happening at the global level, we see through all of the contributions in this publication the work that is continuing to be done in the Global South and those initiatives, those local initiatives, solutions that are being put together are really doing the work of the Nexus. And we really feel very, very strongly that yet again, we are in a situation where we must urge the international community to come behind and to support the work of these local organizations who are working across the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus, because that is what they have in front of them. That is what we have in front of us. And you will hear from a group of extraordinary professionals who are doing quite extraordinary work as well about how it is that we can support each other and support all of them in the work that they do. And I'm very, very happy now to hand over to Laura Frigenti, who's the CEO of the Global Partnership for Education, who has recorded a video message for our opening.
Colleagues, partners, and friends. A decade ago, we named the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus because reality demanded it. Crisis, once thought short and exceptional, had become protracted and recurrent, trapping millions in cycles of relief without recovery and peace. Ensuring a smooth transition between humanitarian and development programs had been debated before, but what was particularly new 10 years ago was the inclusion of the peace dimension. We were called to change how we worked so that international assistance not only helped people survive, but also enabled them to thrive, become self-reliant in the long term, and contribute to peaceful societies. Few sectors make this imperative clearer than education. Education is one of the rare investments that simultaneously protects children during a crisis, accelerates recovery, builds resilience, and lays the foundation for stability and prosperity in the long term. This collection of policy insights marks a decade of effort to translate the Nexus from principle into practice. It brings together voices from countries, civil society, and development partners, and offers practical strategies grounded in country realities. This issue offers valuable insights on how to invest in people, center teachers, and strengthen local leadership. It demonstrates how much can be achieved when we work together to deliver the best results for children. But we must urgently work to accelerate this process. Crises are increasing in frequency and severity. Today, 234 million children and adolescents have their learning disrupted by displacement, climate change, and conflict. At the same time, financial headwinds are intensifying. Government spending is constrained by rising debt and fiscal pressures. Meanwhile, aid to education is declining. As we look to the next 10 years, the task ahead is not to redefine the Nexus, but to realize it. We must redouble our efforts to build strong, resilient education systems that can withstand shocks, even as we grapple with resource constraints and overlapping crises. And we must anchor these efforts in humanity, putting people first, investing in teachers, empowering local leaders, and building national capacities. We must also let evidence be our compass in this complex landscape, showing us what works, where resources have the greatest impact, and how to scale sustainably. Because education remains the strongest route to a better future. When a child learns, infant mortality declines, child marriage decreases, and lifetime earnings rise. Multiplied across millions, these gains transform societies, anchoring prosperity, peace, and resilience. It will take all of us working together to build inclusive, resilient education systems and ensure every child in crisis can keep learning. I encourage everyone to read this thoughtful collection of articles, as I believe it will help us realize this shared vision. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Laura Frigenti of the Global Partnership for Education, whom the study came out last year that shows that 40 to 60% of the Global Partnership for Education funding is actually in protracted crises. And fragile contexts. So again, demonstrating that this humanitarian development peace nexus is absolutely critical in so many places and for so many actors. And now I'm thrilled to introduce Alison Joyner, who is Education and Emergency Specialist with us here at NORAG and the lead editor of this outstanding collection. And I'm handing over now to Alison to see you through the rest of this event. Thank you so much, Alison, for bringing together such an extraordinary collection of authors and contributions.
Thank you, Moira. And I should say Moira is the co-editor. It's been a real pleasure to work together on this piece of work. So good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone. A very, very warm welcome. And I'm delighted to see so many of you here today. We'd like to extend our sincerest thanks to Laura Frigenti for her inspiring opening. The Global Partnership for Education, as Moira mentioned, has raised $10.6 billion for education in low and middle income contexts since 2003, including, as she mentioned, over 40% of current partnership countries affected by conflict and fragility. As such a critical player in the education landscape, GPE's endorsement through this policy insights of making a reality of a Nexus approach, and therefore of quality education for all learners in all contexts, is significant. When we launched the call for short papers reflecting on the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus, since the term was coined 10 years ago, we weren't sure what to expect. But a lot of very busy people, many working at or close to the delivery of education in some of the most challenging contexts, were eager to share their thoughts and experience. The number and quality of contributions we received is a testament to the relevance of a Nexus approach, to ensuring that children and young people have the best chance of quality education wherever they live. We are honoured and humbled by the commitment of all the contributors, and are fortunate to be hearing from a few of them in just a few minutes. And I can also see that many have also joined online. So a really warm welcome in particular to those of you who are here. The launch of this 6th edition of NORAG's Policy Insights coincides with two important related events. Firstly, last month we joined the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE, in celebrating 25 years of existence. Informed by consultations with its membership, INEE is marking this anniversary by making constructive disruption its new strategic direction. Centering the critical role of teachers and local leadership, INEE's guidance will be characterized by listening for shared decision-making and making local knowledge global. International actors should earn their legitimacy from making room rather than taking it, helping to break silos and valuing reciprocity. INEE promises to support the shift in power that has long been called for, and we are proud to demonstrate the connection between our two networks in co-hosting this launch. Secondly, next week, the Global Refugee Forum holds a progress review to assess progress on commitments made at the 2023 GRF. A record 72 education pledges, which were made 2 years ago, focus on the inclusion of refugees, including teachers, in host country education systems. Working with those governments, ministries, and other partners to take a long-term view on the generally protracted crisis faced by those fleeing conflict incarnates a cross-sectoral approach that integrates emergency response, long-term development, and peace-building efforts, the triple nexus. Next slide, please. Camille. So this collection of articles, of each around 800 words, offers digestible reflections and key takeaways, calls to action, richly illustrated by concrete examples which show what has been achieved over 10 years of the Nexus, the many ongoing challenges, and where to go from here. Contributions cover a wide range of contexts, types and aspects of education, from early childhood to university level, including accelerated education, edtech, curriculum, and teacher professional development. Looking across the over 40 contributions, a golden thread which emerges is that of the relationships that underpin a Nexus approach. Those amongst teachers, learners and their communities in classrooms and schools, between teachers and representatives of the system, between local actors and those who are international. The critical importance of mutual trust, respect and flexibility at all levels is underlined. And as part of that, we need to pay attention to whose voices we are hearing in the debates and at the decision-making tables. The role of teacher-led research and inclusive coordination mechanisms that give equal weight to local and more powerful actors are central. So I'm now briefly going to take you through each of the sections, but there's of course much overlap between them, as you can see from the table of contents. One contribution could arguably be placed in another section, but we hope that this organisation nevertheless helps to structure several key aspects of a Nexus approach, while the cross-cutting themes of local leadership, the centrality of teachers, and the absolute necessity of long-term, flexible financing, all underpinned by those strong relationships, run throughout. So the first section, entitled Taking Stock, is what you see on the page here. And I'm showing you these section pages so you can see what the title page looks like for each section. But I won't be citing any of the authors in each for the contributions because I don't have time to cover all of them. I'll let you return to that after the webinar. But this opening chapter, Taking Stock, reminds us that the triple nexus is the latest expression of a long recognized concept, an early articulation of which was linking relief, rehabilitation and development. However, the HDP nexus does seem to go beyond jargon. The value of a Nexus approach lies partly in the accountability encapsulated, at least in theory, in the Grand Bargain of 2016, which was in response to a need for greater quality, justice, accountability, and the funding to facilitate it in all contexts, as Laura reminded us also. That Grand Bargain was signed by 67 international humanitarian donors, UN agencies, the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, NGOs, and other local humanitarian partners. We need to hold all of them to account. Contributors in this section examine coherence, financing models, and lessons learned. They highlight that the Nexus reflects how programming evolves to support inclusive, quality, holistic education across different types of crisis, even when the practitioners, those who are actually doing the work, don't know the term Nexus. It makes sense, this Nexus approach. People don't live in silos, so it seems to be an expression of what's the reality in practice. Next slide, please. Section 2, Centering Humanity, focuses on reimagining education centered on human well-being, with examples from psychosocial support, social and emotional learning, community and social resilience. These contributions illustrate how integrating mental health and psychosocial support through localized approaches can operationalize Nexus thinking by addressing both urgent well-being and long-term resilience. The operative word is localized. Contextualization to the specific situation by the actors in it is absolutely essential. The education, peace-building, social cohesion connection is critically examined. We like to believe that this leads to long-term sustainability, but there is an evidence gap there that needs to be filled. Next slide, please. Section 3, Teaching at the Heart of the Nexus. This section is arguably the very heart of the whole publication, exploring the crucial role of teachers without whom no education can happen. Contributors highlight the importance of paying attention to teacher well-being in support both of them as individuals, but also their learners. Hearing teachers' voices can be facilitated through their involvement as researchers, along with a focus on their professional development, their agency, and their central function in building a just peace. Next slide, please. The penultimate section, Leading Locally, is by some way the longest. This chapter offers a wide range of examples illustrating the value and necessity of shifting power to local leadership and solutions. There's a focus on empowering community actors, integrating community and national systems, and addressing structural barriers to funding and coordination. authors caution the long distance we still have to travel before local actors truly have the power and resources they need to hold their rightful place in the decisions that affect them. Next slide, please. And then finally, making the connections. This section examines lessons from coordinating bodies, the integration of child protection with education, bridging evidence systems, and particularly illustrates the importance of anticipatory action, about which we will hear some more later. This relatively short chapter builds on the illustrations of the importance of coordination and collaboration, which emerge from all the other chapters. Next slide, please. Before I conclude this brief overview, I want to make pay tribute, in fact, to all the contributors who come from 4 continents and half of whom are from the Global South. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there are over 100 people who've contributed to this publication, and we salute all of them. Thank you. And the next slide, please. And their contributions come from or examine initiatives from 34 different countries, again, across 4 continents, and you can see them all listed there. And so I really encourage you to go and take a closer look at the contents of this publication after the webinar. But in the meantime, we're going to give you a taster from 5 contributors and 1 discussant who will help to elucidate the key themes and ideas in this publication. So now we move to our panelists, wishing all a very warm welcome. I'd like to invite you to put on your cameras so we can see who you are. And just to explain what's going to happen, we'll have a first round of questions, followed by reflections from our discussant. I'm going to introduce each person as they start to speak. And then there'll be a second round of questions and some final reflections from Ejid, our discussant. And then after that, we should have at least 20 minutes for question and answer. So as Moira encouraged you, please feel free to put your questions and to big up the questions that you've seen already written as you see. So let's launch into the heart of this webinar. First, I'm going to turn to Anne Smiley, Global Practice Lead for Foundational Learning at the International Rescue Committee. Anne and colleagues wrote a contribution that appears in section 1, Taking Stock. So to start us off, Anne, and referring to your contribution, how would you answer the challenge that the HDP nexus is just another buzzword?
Thanks for the question, Alison, and it's a good one. I would automatically say that the Nexus represents something that's really critical right now, especially in the reduced funding environment that we're in. It's far more than a buzzword because it moves us away from fragmentation and towards collaboration, towards efficiency, and towards a much needed focus on system strengthening at national and local levels. And that's really where we need to go. I loved what was said earlier about how the Nexus actually represents reality, what's happening on the ground. And I really believe that that's why it's not a buzzword. It's something that we really all grapple with and think about and implement on a daily basis. And we need our structures and systems to support that. In our contribution, my co-authors and I bring in a second term, which is coherence. And what we define coherence as is the alignment of systems and actors and contexts across humanitarian and development and peace sectors to meet urgent educational needs and support long-term systems transformation to positively impact all the different communities we serve, and in particular, refugee and host communities in the context that we're working in and that we illustrate in our contribution. So that contribution was the Play Matters project. We did some research within the project. And so I encourage you to take a look at the article and read more about what we did. But with the support of the LEGO Foundation, and we're lucky to have them as a co-author on this piece, IRC and our partners on Play Matters implemented a large-scale refugee education program focusing on education quality using learning through play as a teaching method. And that program was called Play Matters, and it lasted for 5 years, and it's coming to the end of the 5 years now. And we worked in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Tanzania. So within the project, we were fortunate enough to have a budget to carry out research on how we could best navigate the humanitarian development nexus within the project, the humanitarian development peace nexus, the triple nexus. And so in that research, we were really looking at how we can balance the shorter term immediate needs of the communities we were working with the longer term system strengthening peace and development needs that we were seeing emerge on the ground. And so it was an opportunity to really dig in and study what we could do better, how we could work better as a project, as the Lego Foundation, as IRC, and through our partners, and how we could change the way we were thinking about our work. So the learnings, which I hope I'll get a chance to talk about a little bit more later, provide significant insight into, first of all, the importance of flexible, sustained, and innovative financing for education. So I think you mentioned this earlier, Allison. I can't say enough how important it is to have that flexibility of financing and that the opportunity to have longer term financing to support the education needs of the communities we're working with. And then secondly, the other big learning that came out of our study was the importance of trust building with national stakeholders and a real focus on resilient system strengthening within our programming, with local stakeholders as well. But in this article, we focus primarily on how we work with government and with national stakeholders. So we really need to work flexibly and collaboratively with government if we want to achieve education coherence, which of course is our goal. So I will just wrap up by saying the Nexus is much more than a buzzword, because it's brought us actually towards meaningful change in the sector. And it's brought us to this term coherence, which I think is pointing the way towards better ways of working for all of us. Thanks, Allison. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Annie, and particularly for elucidating that term coherence, which indeed does come up quite often, and for highlighting the critical need for financing, but also trust building. I really appreciate that very much. Thank you. So my next question is for Mayuri Kamaraguri, who is a PhD student at the Ontario International School of Education at the University of Toronto and Global EIE Specialist at Right to Play. And Mayuri's piece appears in section 2, Centering Humanity. So Mayuri, why from your perspective is a Nexus approach important?
Thanks so much, Allison, and thanks everyone for being here. I think my first point here has already been said, but I just want to reemphasize that education systems do not function in silos and communities do not think in silos. So that's really the first reason why the Nexus approach is not, it's not really an option. It's really just the way of working of communities. So we know that all of the humanitarian development and peace needs constantly overlap in context of crises. And our sector needs to reflect that reality. A Nexus approach starts from this simple truth that education actors have to work in ways that recognize these interconnected needs and priorities of communities. Secondly, I think that the triple Nexus gives us a frame to intentionally leverage education's potential for transformation. So I think we can move beyond the Nexus as a technical coordination frame and really use it for transformation. It helps us shift from short-term fixes to long-term transformation. As we bring together the comparative advantages of humanitarian development and peace approaches, we really are able to leverage education, not just for coordination and architecture, system strengthening, local leadership, but for actually the content of what is happening in classrooms, as I speak to in my contribution about the ways in which, the triple Nexus is made real by the everyday practices of teachers and learners in classrooms around the world. Thirdly, in my contribution, I do emphasize the peace pillar of the HDP Nexus. And I think this is especially urgent right now. We're seeing policy discourses and donor agendas really starting to emphasize a bit of a security agenda which is concerning. It's troublesome. And so I think it's an important moment for us as the education community to really reemphasize the peace dimension and what that can look like within education and EIE. So I think education can and should listen to communities facing conflict and elevate the peace building functions, as I said, that schools, teachers, and learners are already playing. And finally, I think a Nexus approach is essential for addressing structural violence. So not just immediate conflict and protracted crises, which we're speaking about, which are of course vitally important. But as we really harness the peace pillar of the triple nexus, we can move beyond responding to crises and actually discuss structural violence and injustices embedded within societies that are drivers of conflict as well. So I think the triple nexus gives that opportunity to weave peace more deeply into EIE efforts, which means confronting legacies of injustice, colonialism, exclusion within society. And I think this does need to go above and beyond conflict-sensitive pedagogy. It's equipping teachers with the agency and skills to navigate these legacies and to cultivate these justice-oriented pedagogies. I think teachers, as I know my colleague will speak to, teachers play this really important dual role, mitigating harm for learners, advancing justice. And I think this is really at the heart of that transformative potential. So I think really to summarize all those points, it's really about harnessing the triple nexus to make education and education emergencies, the work that we all do and that learners and teachers and communities are doing, more transformative. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mayuri. And I particularly appreciate your emphasis there indeed on the way in which the Nexus can be translated through pedagogy, and that it's, again, as Annie mentioned, representing reality, that people don't function in silos, and that connection with peace is so critical. And as you mentioned, we're going to turn to Lawrence, who's going to speak to us a little more about the teacher aspect. So turning to you now, Lawrence Beruin, who is assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Lawrence's contribution evidently comes in section 3, teaching at the heart of the Nexus. So Lawrence, from your perspective, why is a Nexus approach so important and indeed necessary?
Thank you for the question, Alison. I think it's this time for us teachers, it's our opportunity to get back our voice, especially in policymaking. The Nexus approach, I think it's about the emphasis. The emphasis rather is on the role and the value that it provides. As such, the idea is to promote self-reflective practice as part of teacher development, which connects the immediate need of teachers, especially those in crisis contexts, our need for long-term professional growth, and the creation of a stable, supportive school environment, as well as community of stakeholders. The mindset here for my article is there's always the need to continually examine our actions. As Mayuri have pointed before, we are critical or crucial in molding not only the students, but also of policymakers, change agents. So we need to always examine our actions, how it affects others, not only the students, not only the parents, the other stakeholders, but even ourselves, our emotions, our professional identity. Yet, especially the global south and developing nations, we teachers, our realities tend to set aside the self-reflective practice, consider it as another burden, or sorry to say this, even a waste of time. As the idea is the current system, it still works, at least on the surface, the current system still works. But I want to emphasize that by strengthening the roles I've indicated in the framework, in the policy paper, teachers as knowledge facilitators, as role models, caregivers, and pillars of the community. Someone that is a mentor at the same time being mentored. institutionalizing self-reflective practice will hopefully help teachers to respond to the urgent challenges, especially with what's happening, climate change, uh, ongoing peace conflicts, as well as um, political upheavals across nations. To respond to such challenges while also building a sustained resilience throughout as pillars of the community, and hopefully to contribute to a more peaceful, coherent learning community, not only for ourselves, but most importantly for the students.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. It's a pleasure to hear you, and thank you for reminding us of the importance of giving teachers, or of teachers reclaiming their voice. And in that framework that you describe in your contribution of the different roles that teachers play and how they can enact the Nexus through that, in fact. So valuable, and we really, really appreciate that. Thank you. So coming now to our fourth intervention, I'm going to turn to Anatazita Samuel, who is the founder and executive director of Women for Change South Sudan. And Women for Change's contribution is found in Section 4, Leading Locally. We're very honoured to have such an eminent local leader on the panel today. So Anna, from your perspective as a national NGO, what value can a Nexus approach bring?
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to really speak tonight in this program. The Nexus approach, particularly the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus, or the Triple Nexus, is important because it is a necessary shift away from fragmented, that is the fractured, disintegrated and disjoint crisis management, towards coherent, context-sensitive approach. To the local actors' perspective, and even for sustainability, it is important stem from the fact that it recognizes interconnection. It emphasizes the interconnection between humanitarian aid, development, and peace-building efforts, which mirrors the reality in affected contexts. It also improved service and resiliency in the communities. The HDP is designed to better serve affected communities by helping actors across more effectively address and anticipate crises while promoting sustainable development and peace, which in the local actors' context, it's a very important necessity. Thirdly, or finally, the HDP enables sustainable outcomes. Taking a Nexus approach is crucial for enhancing and fostering an integrated and collaborative action among the three sectors, and is considered the most effective ways to facilitate the continuity of quality education for all in all contexts, not only in South Sudan, not only in crisis context, but also even in devolved context. So from the local actors' perspective, we feel the Nexus approach, it's a very crucial aspect based on those three areas that I have also highlighted. And it also encourages locally led initiatives, whether in education, in development, in peace building, or in developmental. We feel that the humanitarian development peace encompasses all those components that requires to build a holistic context, a holistic approach, a sustainable approach in all contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I love the way you highlight that shift from fragmentation towards interconnection and evoking again that idea of relationships, which are so important across all the different sectors, as you mentioned, the integration. And in particular, coming from your context, the focus on peace and the absolute essential nature of that for any kind of sustainability. And I particularly like the way you highlight the fact that this is applicable in all contexts. And I think this is one of the things that for me is so important about this approach. It's quality education, as it's described in the INEE minimum standards, is for everybody, and the structure applies across contexts, even though you have to adapt it. So thank you very much for reminding us of that point. So now we come to the final contributor on the panel. And for this, I come to Isufu Wedrago, who is an education technical advisor at Save the Children and the education cluster coordinator for the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so he's calling in today from Eastern Congo. Before he was working for Save the Children, Isufu was for over 20 years a teacher, school director, advisor, and inspector for the Ministry of Education in Burkina Faso. So he brings that critical national government perspective as well to his contribution. And the contribution of the education cluster appears in section 5, making the connections. So Isufu, from your perspective, both as an INGO representative and former Ministry of Education official, how would you answer the challenge that the HDP Nexus is just another buzzword?
Okay, thank you very much, Alison, for giving the floor to talk on behalf of my fantastic colleague from Save the Children, who co-authored this piece of work that you can discover in the policy insight. To respond to your question, I would say that the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus, I understand really why some people do consider it like another buzzword. When it remains abstract and disconnected from real action, it would just be considered like another jargon. But in fragile contexts like DR Congo, where we are working, it's far from theoretical. It's rather a practical necessity. Because the community we are serving are not experiencing a crisis in silo. I mean, education, protection, and peace building are deeply interconnected. Take, for instance, anticipatory action that we mentioned in our piece of work. By prepositioning teaching and learning materials and training teachers before displacement, we can prevent learning loss, save lives, and reduce costs. But for this to be achieved, humanitarian actors need to work hand in hand with development partners and also peace building actors. And this is a clear example of the HDP Nexus in action that contribute to reduce costs and save lives and assure a continuity of education. Let's say that the HDP Nexus is all about shifting from short-term and fragmented response to coherent strategy that combines humanitarian speed, development depth, and peace-building sustainability. For the HDP Nexus when the HDP Nexus is well implemented, it can contribute to strengthen the system and build resilience and address the root causes of vulnerability. So I will conclude this part by saying that the HDP Nexus would just be another jargon word if we let it be. On the other hand, I do believe, with my colleague, of course, that it's a powerful tool on our hand to assure the provision of resilient, timely, and inclusive educational responses, even in time of crisis. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isufu. And thank you for reminding us of how we can breathe life into that word, that jargon word of the Nexus, and how that works in practice in one of the most complicated contexts of the world for the continuity of education, I should say. And in particular, you highlight how people don't live in silos. And I think we can all respond to that ourselves in our own lives. And Your capturing the HDP nexus in speed, depth, and sustainability, I think, is something that can serve as a reminder for all of us. And in particular, I think what's very important here is attacking the root causes through a nexus approach, because ultimately that's the only way we can find solutions, is by trying to find out the solutions to those causes at the beginning. So many thanks to you, and many thanks to all 5 of you for this first round of questions. So now I'm going to turn to our discussant, Egide Kionkoro, who is a Burundian asylum seeker living in Switzerland, and I have great pleasure in welcoming him to our panel. He's pursuing his master's degree in responsible management at the University of Geneva and has been an active youth representative member working in education emergencies for the last 7 years. He's been collaborating with organizations including UNHCR, the Red Cross, and the Geneva Global Hub for Education in Emergencies. So welcome again, Egide, and I'd like to hand over to you for a few minutes of reactions from your side to the speakers so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. Let me know if you can hear me.
It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Listening to the panelists, I found myself thinking deeply about what the HDP Nexus really means in practice and why it matters. We have heard so many technical terms over the years that sounded promising, but failed to change anything on the ground. But as I reflect on what the panel shared, and from my personal experience, I see HDP Nexus as something much more substantial. It represents a needed alignment of the system, a way of forcing us to contextualize our work and connect humanitarian development and peace efforts so that they don't operate in silos. For me, what makes the Nexus meaningful is precisely its ability to shift us away from short, fragmented, and reactive interventions toward a sustained, flexible collaborations with national actors. That shift is not theoretical. Its absence has real consequences. Like a short testimony is in 2017, I was living in Rwanda as a refugee. And by luck, I got a full funded opportunities to go study in Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda. And unfortunately, in my 3rd year, it was in 2020, COVID spread all over the world. So I lived through one of those moments where the lockdowns began, and working from home for many people across the globe meant staying in comfortable spaces with stable internet. But for me, it was originated from the refugee camp. It meant returning to a refugee camp where electricity and connectivity were almost impossible to secure. And as someone who was almost graduating, like overnight, all my classes moved online. So I was supported by this program called ITEME, which was a program that was providing extra assistance to refugee students for them to adapt to the system. So the ITEME program has supported us for years, but like so many humanitarian initiatives, it was not built with long-term adaptability in mind. They had no budget for this kind of crisis and no contingency plans. So the only immediate solution was to advise us to look for friends or relatives in bigger towns who might help us stay in a place where we can access electricity and internet while they are trying to figure out what to do to assist us. So that experience showed me exactly why a Nexus approach is not just a buzzword. Like without a system that prioritizes the long-term resilience and flexibility, crises, like whether global or local, can hit the most vulnerable are the ones who are really negatively affected by such scenarios. So a Nexus-oriented system might have enabled programs like ITEME to adapt quickly and to anticipate disruptions and collaborate with local communities and nationals to structure in ways that can protect students and like me from falling behind. Another point the panelists made that really made me resonate with them is the emphasis on people, especially teachers and their professional growth. This is something that other approaches in the past have overlooked. And I can personally speak that, like coming from the refugee to integrate to the new education system, I had so many PTSD, I had trauma. And for every time I submitted the work and the feedback from professors, I always, like the area of growth, I always took them as personal. Like I could think like they have something against me. And that pushed them to go extra mile to help me understand that whatever they are doing is for my growth, for my well-being. And so, like you say, taking into considerations the teachers in this approach is really very important. And their capacity to work with me through the transition made all the difference. And I believe that capacity also depends on a system that cares for them and invest in them. And if implemented with commitment, the Nexus becomes a way of preparing system, not just to respond to emergencies, but to withstand them. And for individuals like me that has lived in both sides of those systems, that shift is not abstract. It is deeply personally meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Egide, for those inspiring words. We really appreciate you sharing from your own personal experience. It's very powerful. And in particular, your recognition of the key role of teachers, which we, as we've said, we read about in the contributions, but to hear it from your personal experience is so important. And we really appreciate your being willing to share that. And the distinction you make between what we hear when we hear the word Nexus and what it actually means in practice really speaks to us as well. And the need for adaptation. And as we all discovered during COVID, the way that meant so many people had to shift, and we had to either didn't manage to make the changes necessary. So very glad that you were able to find your way through that. Thank you again for that. And so that brings us to the second round of questions. I'm happy to see there are lots of questions coming into the chat box and to the question and answer section. If we can encourage you to keep putting your questions into the question and answers. It feels like we should take a little pause now, but I'm going to carry on so that we have plenty of time at the end to answer those questions. So I'm now going to ask the panelists to share with us their key learnings, the key takeaways, to summarize those key takeaways that we have mentioned and that are part of the publication. So in other words, we want to focus on what happens next, what needs to happen, and how we can make more strongly a reality of that Nexus approach. So I'd like to start with you, Anna, as the voice from local leadership. What is your call to action for all those who can support change?
Thank you so much for that wonderful question. And it's also great to hear from really a lot. As I said before, my central call to action for making the HDP Nexus a reality must focus on addressing the systematic barriers of financial rigidity and decentralization of power that currently embed integration. What concretely needs to happen now is that the structural reorientation of fundings and leadership. Global assistance requires a structural and principle realignment behind local leadership. Global actors must prioritize local ownership and channeling more funding and leadership to local actors, especially WLOs, persons with disability, and even in general, the local actors. Secondly, we also want to talk about the flexible, coordinated financing. There must be a move away from the persistent financial granaries and incompatible funding streams. This means global structure must provide coordinated systems and flexible long-term financing that can be rapidly adapted. For example, through joint donor approaches such as the full fundings, which even is more sustainable than others. Lastly, our call to action is that address operational bottlenecks For example, compliance bottlenecks that exclude smaller local organizations, such as double LOs or double ROs, from directly receiving the flexible funding must be removed. Furthermore, we should also have an integrated and coordinated action requires moving beyond fragmented data system to ensure investment are responsive to context. Having said this, the triple nexus approach, if our call for action is taken positively, it will yield more results than it's the current system. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and for highlighting that importance of reorienting financing behind local leadership. It's so important and very powerfully put there. And also for specifically mentioning the role of women-led organizations, refugee-led organizations, those working with disability and other local organizations. So important. So now I'd like to turn to Isufu, representing the coordination structures that try to address the challenges in the most difficult contexts.
Okay.
What do you see as the priority actions right now?
Okay, thank you very much. From my perspective, to realize the full potential of humanitarian development and peace Nexus, we should walk the talk. I mean, we should move from rhetoric to action through 3 concrete steps. The first one would be to integrate education in multi-sectorial framework for anticipatory action, because most of the time the education sector is left out of some frameworks, despite of his vital role in building community resilience. And if we like pre-agreed triggers and finance for education sector would allow it to play its protective role in a crisis. This is how we can break silos across the different sectors. The second one should be to embed crisis modifiers in development programs, because most of the time the development programs are planned for a long time. Unfortunately, at a certain point of time, some shock or sudden onset may happen. And if we have this flexibility, it can allow the program to adjust to the new situation so that humanitarian speed can help to keep on track the development objective and the peace building objective. For the third aspect, I think it's very necessary to build the capacities of the community ahead of the crisis. I'm thinking about government officials, parent-teacher association, school management committees, and local communities should be well equipped to analyze data and to develop some early warning system and implement some anticipatory action action to cope with the situation they are facing. And I think if we realize all these 3 aspects, we can progress with the Nexus agenda. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Isufu, for giving us those 3 really clear points. Walk the talk of not operating in silos, crisis modifiers as part of anticipatory action, and preparedness of everybody. Thank you very much. So now, Anne, from the international perspective, what do you think needs to happen now to make the Nexus happen?
Thank you, Allison, and thank you especially to Anna and Isufu, because I think everything I'm going to say really supports and reinforces what you've already said. So I hope it doesn't sound repetitive. I hope instead it sounds like a really clear call to action for everyone, because I think we're all really aligned. So first, the concrete action for the international community is we need, as donors and as international community members, to commit to that flexible and innovative financing. So I guess we've said that already, but I think it is a really incredibly important point that we all need to align behind. So that innovative financing and flexible financing should be aligned with longer term outcomes, and that can enable that quick, nimble responsiveness to immediate needs and emerging crises, and also support long-term resilience and system strengthening of whatever education system is available to support those responses. So the big example that we talk about in our contribution is the crisis modifier that the LEGO Foundation built into our Play Matters project, where we were able to reallocate a large proportion of the budget, $15 million, to the emergency response in northern Ethiopia. And that nimbleness and flexibility that the donor provided really allowed us to address a major crisis that we had not anticipated at the time of the proposal, development, and design within a long-term 5-year, now 6-year project. So just crisis modifiers, I cannot emphasize enough how helpful they are and how critical they are. But in addition to that, IRC as an organization, and I think the whole sector, is moving towards pre-positioned finance, towards pre-positioning educational responses, towards anticipatory action, as you were talking about, Isafu, so that we are much more resilient and prepared as the international community and also as government to basically promote learning continuity so that we can minimize those disruptions to learning. So I think that's kind of my biggest message. But the other two that I just want to mention is that in addition to that, we need to look at more, as an international community, at more sustained long-term financing. The 5-year duration, which extended to 6 because of COVID, of our project, Play Matters, really made a huge difference in being able to not only think about emergency response, but also move towards system strengthening and scale within the context of the education quality improvement that we were focusing on within the 3 countries and with government. So everything we did was collaborative with government across the project, because we had the time and the resources and the investment of those 5 or 6 years. And then building on that, the final point is we have to really focus on building long-term trust-based engagements with government and with those national stakeholders. We cannot work around national stakeholders. Systems are not always strong. Even when systems are not strong, we need to work with and through systems as much as we possibly can, with education systems and with government. And that means, wherever possible, seconding staff into ministries instead of setting up like external structures, co-creation of policies and curricula and tools and materials and approaches, rather than bringing in imported solutions. So co-creation is a huge part of it. And then I'm a researcher, so really strong focus on evidence. And we need to make sure that we generate evidence with and through national partners and local partners. And that really makes a huge difference in terms of translating learnings and findings into government-led action. My final point is that the international community must commit to approaches that elevate and empower national ownership, ensuring then that education reforms and system strengthening and resilience are embedded and legitimate and sustainable as much as we can within the confines of the realities that we operate within. That's all for now. I'll hand back to you, Allison. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you for that powerful call to action for that national leadership, underpinned by that nimbleness of funding, the long-term funding that allows going to scale, and critically the trust in local partners and local systems, which is so important. So now I'm going to turn to Mayuri and asking you, thinking about the humans, the people at the center of all this, what is your call to action to make a reality of our vision for the HDP Nexus?
Thanks so much, Allison. And I think the answer is sort of in the question, isn't it? It's the section is centering humanity, and I think the call to action is centering humanity. But to expand on that a bit more, I think the call to action is to center people, center agency, center justice. And I think if we can do that, we really have a constructive path forward. The HDP or triple nexus, it stops being just a framework on paper and it becomes lived reality for communities experiencing sudden onset, reoccurring crisis, but also structural violence and ongoing injustices. So I guess to be a bit specific, so in the section around centering humanity, my contribution, and actually that of the other contributors in that section, we really all speak to the value and importance of social emotional learning. And so in my contribution, I argue that social emotional learning can be a really practical entry point for centering humanity and for bringing peace and peace education back into the fold of the triple nexus in terms of classroom delivery. In our experiences at Right to Play, for example, we found that social emotional learning helps learners build empathy, perspective taking, critical thinking, self-awareness. These are all competencies that are deeply aligned with peace education. And they're not abstract skills, right? I mean, they're capacities that people draw on a daily basis to navigate conflict, displacement, and uncertainty in daily lives. I think that to then further extend social emotional learning towards some of what we've learned from the peace education sector is to then continue, as I said in my first response, to really understand the structural drivers of conflict through peace education and use social emotional learning as that entry point to dive deeper in our educational spaces. So if we want a nexus that really genuinely advances peace, then integrating those perspectives is important. However, because there's always a but, it's never straightforward. This requires, I think, honest reflection from us as a sector. We have to examine whose knowledge, whose values, and whose worldviews are embedded in social emotional learning frameworks, curricula, teacher training, and the assessment tools that we're promoting, as many of my colleagues on the panel have already said. So if we're asking learners to understand power and justice and inequality and leverage all of these social emotional competencies, then we have to interrogate our own. And as Yusufu said, this is part of what walking the talk would kind of look like in practice, right? And I think, finally, none of this is possible without shifting power. So I'm situated in the global north or the minority world. And so to make the nexus real, we have to move resources, decision-making authority to local civil society, like Anna, local educators like Lawrence, teacher-led initiatives. We know that communities are doing the work of sustaining learning, nurturing social cohesion, and supporting healing in the midst of crisis. And so our role my role situated internationally, globally, minority world, whatever term you want to use, should really be there to support and not override the local leadership and nexus initiatives that are already happening, that actually help us concretize what it looks like, which is always the big question. How do we operationalize it? What does it look like in practice, and what makes it tangible? And I think that's all there. We just need to listen and learn. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mayuri, and particularly for making that connection between those social and emotional skills, which, as you say, we draw upon on a daily basis, maybe not even consciously, and the Nexus approach and in particular peace building. We know it's difficult to prove necessarily all of those connections, but so important. And that's one of the areas where we see an evidence gap, which could be a focus for future research indeed. Fantastic. So we're nearly at the end of the small responses to questions, but I very consciously saved the last speaker for this round of questions for Lawrence, bringing in the voice of teachers, who are the most critical players in supporting the continuity of children and young people's learning in all sorts of contexts. So Lawrence, what do you think are the most important changes we need to see now?
I think we need to first understand that the reality is that teachers don't share the same privileges. While we are here at this very moment trying to make sense of our realities, most of my peers, of fellow educators, are and their specific situations, coping with the context or specific crisis context that they are in. But while we don't share the same privileges, we share the same role and goal that we teachers should always be part of the solution. As I've said previously, reclaiming our voice, our integrity as teachers, that we are integral pieces to ensure that our community will flourish and our next generation will, I hope, not suffer the same perils that we experience today. But again, there's a but, as stated previously. We are only part of the solution. We can't answer to everything. We are the frontliners, but we need someone, some institutions, organizations to push our back, to continue moving forward, irrespective of the situation. So, as we are only part of the solution, the idea is through self-reflective practice, we can be the empowered teachers who knows their identity, the extent of what they can do, what they can offer, and if the empowered we are aware of our capacities, then we can demand institutional and systemic change. As we teachers relearn the actual importance, I want to emphasize relearning our actual importance, because for the most part, again, we forget about who we are, especially when, my experience during COVID pandemic and ongoing series of natural disasters happening in our country. So, irrespective of where someone is coming from, one should relearn our actual importance, especially in times of need. So, as empowered we, trying to be part of the solution, we need to expect from the government and similar institutions that our integrity, our professional capacity, our rights be recognized as well as reciprocated accordingly, so that we are part of the solution, but at the same time, we are being taken care of.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. That's very powerful as a reminder of the critical role of teachers. And I love your phrase, the empowered we, based, I think, on that, partly on that self-reflection that you describe in your article very clearly. And in therefore putting teachers in the position to be able to reclaim their rights, the recognition for their capacities, and to be part of that solution. And I think to a large extent leaders in those solutions, at least within the education field. That would be our vision, at least. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to turn back to Egide and ask him to provide us with some concluding reflections. Thank you, Egide.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. I was listening to each one's recommendations, and I mean, I just have to add some comments because they already spoke my mind. And most of the terms that kept coming back was resilience and preparedness. And yes, we know the difference is coming, but the issue will come on the practical part, where you have to implement what is said, what is prepared, what was analyzed. And I think, as Lawrence says, it's very important. We cannot talk about improving the quality of education without thinking about the teachers. And I think this goes beyond even teachers, because the field has its own reality, and it's very important to make every stakeholder feels empowered, valued, and supported. And this is very important because, like you said before, we've seen so many projects coming in, theories, setting goals, but when it comes to applying what we said, it becomes a failure. And mostly, I think the people on the field, the local governments, everyone who's trying to contribute to the implementation, most of the time they are overlooked because people comes with ideas, have a bigger picture, an end of the project. But the process, like we have a good chance of having people who have done research. We have teachers here. They are sharing how they have felt overlooked and how, at some point, regardless of how the project is really coming to tackle the issue, but people are being part of those projects at some point they feel like they are forgotten. They're not really taken care of. And at some point they feel like the project is they're just being used in this implementation. So I think the SDP Nexus approach should take into considerations everyone's opinions. I don't say they're not doing it, but I think it's when it comes to implementing, I think every voice, even if it be like one critic from 1,000 compliments, that one critic should be taken into consideration with a very high seriousness to make sure this aligns with what goes on the same line with what SDP Nexus approach is trying to do. But at the same time, the beneficiaries really feel like it's something that is bringing a real change on the field. That's what I want to try to share.
Thank you very much, Ajid, for those powerful reflections and for reassuring us that the speakers had already spoken your mind. But it's great to hear your added thoughts on that, and in particular highlighting the perspective of communities. So with that, I'd like to say another huge thank you to all of the panelists for their answers to the questions so far. And now we're going to move into the audience questions. I hope you've still got lots of strength available. We have about half an hour. And so I'm hoping also that people will stay online to listen to the responses. And I'm going to use the bigging up process. So I'm going to start with the question that has the most number of thumbs up. And I'm going to read it out because it's quite a long question, and I think it will give then the panelists a chance to think about it. And I may direct the question to one or more panelists in particular, because I think unfortunately we won't have time to go around everybody. So this question was sent by Julia Catano. And her question is, how can we effectively assess the quality of relationships within education systems, particularly in emergency contexts, and work towards making them more collaborative and trust-based rather than competitive? So this question of measurement. And she's citing a recent assignment assessing the Global Partnership of Education's work on enabling system transformation, where she was struck by how systems thinking theories emphasize the importance of understanding stakeholder relationships. But in practice, these dynamics, including power imbalances and competitive behaviors, are often overlooked. As emergencies escalate and resources diminish, addressing this blind spot feels more urgent than ever. So I'm thinking I might start with you, Annie, to see if you can pass a few reflections on that, because indeed, as you say, you're a researcher, and I think you've got a lot of experience in this area.
It's a hard question, but I'm happy to tackle it. Measuring these things is always challenging, and ultimately it might not be really fully possible to measure relationships and the quality of relationships and the quality of trust, or what trust even means or looks like in a specific context. What we've done on some of the projects that I've worked on is we have like a policy development or policy and advocacy sort of development tracker. And what we do is and I'm sure some of you have seen these kinds of materials before, but you have a clear matrix with different activities or system strengthening activities maybe that you're looking at, and you kind of measure how they're progressing and changing over time. And you can include the quality of relationships and the types of relationships in a tracker like that, so that you're holding yourselves accountable to building that trust over time. But none of that can happen without time. And so I think the key factor ultimately is long-term engagements, long-term system strengthening approaches that allow those relationships to be built. And the project mentality doesn't really lend itself to building long-term relationships, because there's always this kind of constant turnover of staff and people. And we know that there's turnover within government as well. So by the way, that's another challenge, is how we manage to maintain and build relationships when on both sides there's constant changes. But ultimately, it is important to track it, and it's important to have time. I think those are my two main takeaways. Back to you, Alison.
Fantastic. Thank you, Annie. Issoufou, you're also working very strongly with systems in different ways. Would you have anything to add? And I'd like to ask the other panelists, just before you go ahead, if any of the rest of you would like to respond to this question, please just put up your hand and I'll come to you afterwards. If not, we'll move to the next question. Thanks, Issoufou, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, in the cluster coordination sector, we have this kind of experience because some studies have been conducted to assess the quality of the relationship between the partners in the implementation of ERE response. Some of the items were to ask the partner, how confident are you to raise some issue with your partner when you are partnering with a local NGO and an international NGO? Are you satisfied with the transfer of risk that has been taken into account in the partnership agreement? And then we have a lot of insight on the quality of response. I think this kind of evidences should be shared. We can develop a plan within the cluster and share with the different partners so that when they are building the partnership, they take into account this kind of situation. And also, one of the practical ways to solve this issue is to design some clear indicators that will monitor and see at a time how, if we are progressing on strengthening the quality of the partnership between the partners. And from this, we can develop an action plan to see how we can progress on this. This is how we can address this issue within cluster coordination. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Issoufou. Just ask people if they're satisfied. That's a very simple answer. Thank you. If anybody else would like to respond on this point, please just come off camera. Yes, please go ahead, Mayuri.
Yeah, well,
Annie
put in the chat as well, which I agree with, that, it's about the skills to be able to engage in these partnerships. And it's a lot about social emotional skills. Absolutely. But I think, those in power that are dictating funding cycles, that are dictating project cycles, all this sort of architecture that defines the nature of our work. I think the message is really towards them to say that relationships take time, and the shorter windows we have, the more we risk instrumentalizing stakeholder building and relationship building and making it about really, specific outcomes that we're all, kind of being put on a time-bound thing to deliver. And it's less about the actual relationship itself. So I think we need to hold both of those things. Of course, we need evidence around what works. We need clear objectives, so we're moving in the same direction. But sometimes relationships are very simple as well. Sometimes it's, if you observe kind of in community, the way that people connect with each other, there's usually a long lead up of just sitting and having a cup of tea and understanding each other and, just really understanding the person's worldview and how they come to this work and what values they're bringing to the table. And that's like the real side of relationship building that nobody wants to instrumentalize. We're sort of forced into this structure in which we have to instrumentalize it and move quickly. And, this person is gone. And now, okay, who's your successor? And now I need to suddenly build a relationship with you. And, so how do we center humanity, and how can we, encourage those in power to really offer that predictable financing and the space and time to invest in relationships so everyone feels like their values have been put on the table and are being heard. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mayuri. So now I'm going to come to a question from Samiullah Hamidi from Afghanistan, who says that Afghanistan can easily be a textbook example of the Nexus failure. How does this insights resource inform the actions for the future, including the localization of knowledge creation? What can higher education organizations do with the insights in order to rebuild the role and influence, the role of community in shaping the aid and development sector in Afghanistan? So I think I'll come first to Lawrence and then perhaps pass to Anna afterwards, if you'd like that, Anna. But I think, Lawrence, you're the one representing at the moment, the one sitting in an education institution, higher education institution.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. And I think as part of a higher education institution, the practice that we can do now is for us to document, as part of specific programs or projects, to document specific community-led practices to ensure that the cultural aspects of specific communities will be retained, and as well as supporting research led by Afghan scholars. So provide necessary funding to ensure that we can reclaim what was lost throughout what had transpired in a crisis-driven situation. And more importantly, for us to embed participatory approaches into our curriculum, in establishing a curriculum that is inclusive, that ensures that each aspect of our every stakeholder are taken accounted for, and for us to ensure that the curriculum that we can provide for the future generations is something that allows them to recapture what was lost, and use their history, their culture, the knowledge from the past to create at least a society that ensures that peace will last, I think.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. That's fantastic to be reminded of the need for those participatory approaches and going back to the history of those communities to understand how to rebuild. I hope that that's a helpful answer, Samula. Would any of the other panelists sorry, Isufu, please go ahead. I'd like you to
thank you, Alison. Thank you, Alison. I'm not from the higher education world, but I think it's all about strategizing. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, we as a higher, it could also be valuable for other sectors. Like if I take the higher education, you have the institution has its ultimate goals. And we want to expand our possibility of working with other partners. And those partners don't have the specific mandate. So how we make room for those specific actors to come and contribute to achieve our objective? I think the first one will be to map up the different organizations with the role and the mandate and see if we are planning to work together in line with the comparative advantage and to increase our collective impact. What should be the role of each partners? And if this is very clear, it's make things easier for the different partners to contribute for the achievement of this collective goal. And this, I think, we can implement it in higher education, in work with community and other sectors. Thank you. This is my contribution to discussion. Over.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Isufu. That's very helpful. Anna, I saw your hand up. Would you like to respond on this one?
Thank you. Actually, what I wanted to say, the colleague from the DRC has said it, but however, of course, I'm not coming from the higher education aspect. I'm coming from the local perspective, is that inclusivity is key. That is one, including all sectors into the approach is very key. Whether being in local actors, whether being international actors, whether being even persons with the disability, all the community, the government, different ministries, even the local community groups, it's very key in that. And then the aspect of the documentation and sharing of key learning, I think it's also very good in this approach for me. And in that, at least you should be able to know what is coming up. The higher education should be able to share what is happening across different sectors and across different areas. That will help to improve one sector in one context for me. And then lastly, I always say we less believe in the approaches of the local context. Local approach is very key in even in this aspect. Because once we are looking at sustainability, we are looking at development, we are looking at aspect that that can stay longer in the even in the education sectors. It's always good to design things from the local perspective, and that can lead to ownership. Especially when you talk about curriculum, when you talk about policies, it's always not good to copy. For example, like from my country, you see that some policies are designed, you don't know where, and they just copy and paste and just changing the logos, and it becomes very hard for learners to even take it. You start looking, where will I get example from? Where do I start from? And even the teachers themselves become confused. They don't know where do I start, you see. So I think having the local aspect is very important. Contextualizing everything for me, that is just okay. That's my response basically to this question. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. That was exactly the kind of perspective that I was hoping to find from you. Thank you. Now we have a difficult question from Kamal Jabbar. I'm going to direct this to you initially, Mayuri. What does a peace outcome look like for education in protracted conflicts, where structural violence and displacements continue for many years with no political settlement in sight, as we witness in Gaza?
Yeah, thank you so much. And was it Kamal that said that?
Yeah,
that asked that question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kamal. We've been having a nice dialogue in the Q&A.
Great. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, this is such a challenging question because it's so hard to, true peace education is about challenging the structures of inequality and injustice and ensuring that learners have the confidence and the skills to tackle these drivers of conflict and have agency and speak for their own justice and advocate for themselves. And in Gaza and in the West Bank, we find ourselves in a situation where learners might learn those principles, but then those same principles aren't being applied to them. And therein lies this incredible tension. I don't really have a clear answer because it's so complicated. But I think that, there are different efforts and there's different framing of the work that we do in the West Bank and Gaza. And, for example, one of the projects I work on in Gaza, in which we're focusing on social emotional competencies, we really first focus on a sense of belonging. And I think, as we've seen in the occupied Palestinian territories, the way in which like culture and identity and heritage are being eroded, that one of the first things to do from an inner peace perspective, because even within peace education, we can begin from a place of inner peace, is really working with the children on feelings of safety, of belonging, of emotional regulation, before we move into these broader kind of social processes. That is where, honestly, it gets a bit more complicated and I think not clear cut in terms of what to prioritize. I know there are actors working in the West Bank on, ensuring children and learners have the skills to know what to do during a settler attack, for example, the way in which they navigate an already unjust system. So, it's a question for us, right? It's an invitation for us. Is education trying to, it partially keeps learners safe, ensure they have the skills to take care of themselves and others, or is it also the skills to be able to just navigate systems of injustice, but slowly plant the seeds for a more just world to come over time? And I think in education, we're always facing this dilemma, nowhere more explicitly than Palestine, but we're constantly facing the dilemma of, are we are we supporting children to exist in the world as it is right now, or are we supporting them to design a much, much better one? And we want them to succeed in this version of the world, but also to totally dismantle it and make it so much better. And so that is education's challenge and EIE's challenge. And so it's all of our invitation to reflect on, I think. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, Mayuri. That's great. Would anybody else like to respond to that question specifically? If not, I can. No, I don't. Isufu, please go ahead.
Okay, I have to admit with my colleague that this is a very complex question. On our perspective, our work relies on the principle of do no harm. When we want to do something, we make sure that through our intervention, we are not creating a lot of harm to the beneficiaries. Then for this, we have first to do the analysis to analyze the risk analysis. What are the probable issue that will raise from this intervention? And if it's possible, the first one I would say would be to start with the advocacy parts, because you have two communities. Then to make sure that your intervention will not create problem, you have to find an agreement to include some content of peace education in school curriculum or in school activities. In curriculum, it's a very complicated thing because you need a lot of funding. But at least you can start with some school activities, children play roles or different activities, so that you can touch upon those sensitive issues and turn it into something that could contribute to peace building. But of course, as I said, it depends on the context, and you have to analyze and have the okay for that. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Isufu. Over to you, Lawrence.
To be honest, most of what I know came from news articles, documentaries. But reading the question, what I can offer is for the community to have a sense of ownership of their schools, that the school is an educational opportunity or an opportunity for the children to dream of something better, for teachers to design, I think, a curriculum that promotes safety, that when they're in the confines of the classroom, they are free to think, to comprehend, and to dream, hope, and a curriculum that promotes humanity. Some humanity that's different from what's happening. While it's very much idealistic, I know we can't always remove them from the context, but my mindset here is at least even the confines of the classroom, the four walls of the classroom, to allow the children to imagine a different future. So the school to be an opportunity for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Yes, dreaming and hope is two critical words, I think, in this context, despite the huge challenges. Thank you very much. So I'm going to move on to, I think we've got time for one or possibly two more questions, depending on who would like to respond. I have a related one, but taking a different angle on the peace question. So I'm going to read it, and then maybe you can put up your hands to say who would like to respond. Let me find it again, sorry. This is coming from Eskida Amencisa. Eskida Amencisa. How do you describe peace or peace-building efforts in a context of no armed and active conflict, nor protracted crisis? For example, in drought-affected communities, is there a space for the P pillar? So who would like to take a shot at that question? Go ahead, Mayuri. Sorry, I did just off my screen, and then Yusufu. So please go first, Mayuri.
Sure. So sorry, just to see the question again, it was around the role of peace education, not in armed conflict, but in other types of crises. Is that right?
Yeah. Is there a space for the P pillar in context of no armed conflict or no armed or active conflict? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the peace pillar should be mainstreamed across all educational settings, if you ask me. I think that we all live in a world of uncertainty, different degrees of uncertainty, different types of uncertainty. But as Ejid said earlier, COVID is something that everyone experienced. We all knew what it was like to have our daily lives disrupted, though we weren't impacted in the same way. That's absolutely true. But I think, the economic reality of the world, the climate reality of the world, the health, we're all, there's so many polycrises happening right now, and uncertainty brings with it an unsettled feeling within ourselves. And so peace, whether that's inner peace or social peace, still has a critical role to play in, I think, all societies, really. And as I said earlier, I think in education and emergencies, we have an opportunity to reframe peace beyond just settings of armed conflict, where, of course, it's critically important, but also thinking about just structural injustice and drivers of violence and tension between groups. And this is something that exists in all societies, right? So what does it look like to embed within education this importance of seeing all other humans as equal and as valuable and as people that are your neighbors and friends? And so there's this work by Bush and Saltarelli that I'm sure a lot of people have read around, the two faces of education, the positive face and the negative face. I think if we don't integrate peace meaningfully, we risk falling into the negative face of education, which can really continue to sow divisions, which can other populations in terms of the way in which either, by gender or by other forms of identity are represented in our textbooks and our educational content. We know that teachers can sometimes carry, the hidden curriculum and promote certain values and norms in their teaching practice. So peace is it's not really a choice, right? I mean, I think it's an essential part of all educational delivery. Otherwise, we don't capitalize on all the positive benefits that education can bring when we really deepen the positive face of it. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yusufu, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think Murari already talked about what I was planning to say, but I will segment her in saying that peace education is not about a conflict context. Even in non-protracted crisis context, we need to work on peace education because it could also contribute to strengthen peaceful coexistence between the different communities. And also in the community, we have a wide variety of categories. You have some vulnerable people, some advantaged people. And when we have peace education, we can, strengthen the bonds between the different category of the community. Instead, peace education could help to prevent the conflict. Because when you share this information with the children, especially at the early age, they learn how to live together with the friends. And as the community, when there is a dispute, they can find a way to solve it because peace education can give them insight on how to solve the small conflict. And I will also touch upon the content, the textbook content, for instance. Mary already mentioned we have some content that could contribute to within peace education. We can go through the different manuals and textbooks to remove those content that can lead to conflict. Thank you. That's what I want to share with the colleagues. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Anna, you had up your hand. Would you still like to speak?
Yeah, thank you. I think much has been mentioned, and I just wanted to say that looking at the current context, the global context, if we take it, of course, mostly a context in crisis are more supported by peace mediators from a context which is not having a maybe civil wars or unrest or something. So having for me peace component in education is very essential because let's take an example. In schools, you see, we are trying to pass peace messages or building peace lovers in different contexts. And when we build from, of course, the different contexts, let's say from the developmental context, the same people will be able to, when something unrest appears somewhere, they will be able to really be great peace mediators. And examples can be cited that why can't we be like this context? Why can't we be like these people? So having peace, whether in a stable context, in crisis context, I just feel actually having a peace education in a stable context is more important than, is actually more critical than having peace in a crisis conflict. Not to be quoted, but if you see that sometimes most of these crises, especially, are associated to external factors. Let's say, for example. So why can't we teach the external factors to be peace lovers, to be peace preachers, to be peace builders, than causing unrest in other contexts? So I think for me, that is where I really come from. And then above all, the principle of peace is that everybody needs to be a preacher, peace lover, and then also knowing that peace begins with you. So literally every individual must have peace within themselves, because if you don't have peace, you will become a thief. And the thieves are all over in a different context, not only in conflict-related context. So I think that is something that I just wanted to share. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Anna. I think that's a perfect word to conclude our session of the questions, and indeed for your panel. I think you've encapsulated what we mean by the HDP Nexus in explaining the importance of peace in all contexts, and peace underpinning, if you like, the humanitarian development part of the Nexus. Thank you so much for that. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Moira, who's going to lead us through the closing. Thanks, Moira.
Thank you so much, Alison, and thank you to all of our inspiring speakers today. It has been, and for all of the fantastic questions as well. I think it's wonderful to finish on that uplifting message of the importance of education in building resilient communities and societies, because the more resilient our societies and our communities, the less demand there is on individuals to have to show resilience. And that is really where we need to be. And now for the closing remarks, I'm really pleased to hand over to a leading voice in this space. We're so honored to have Faiza Hassan, from the director of the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, to give us some closing remarks on this particular event and publication. Faiza, over to you.
Thank you so much, Moira and team. Really, thank you for an incredibly rich discussion today. I think what today has made clear is that the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus is not an aspiration, it's a necessity. And that too much of our system still behaves as if education can be divided into parts. Crisis response here, system reform there, peace building efforts somewhere else. And I think, as so many speakers have said today, people's lives are not in silos. And so our systems shouldn't either. And I think really listening to people today and the reflections we've all heard, we heard a consistent message. And that is that the biggest barrier that we face is structural. But we also heard that something equally important, and that is that fragmentation isn't inevitable. Like, this is the product of a system that we have the power to reshape and to change. I think what I've also heard here today is that localization has to become an operational reality. We've heard that, teachers, community groups, women-led organizations, and young people are already leading using the Nexus approach, because that is life in general on the ground. And our systems need to catch up to their leadership and not to limit it, but to stand behind it and to back it. What I've also heard today is that a strong reminder that teachers are at the front line. They are the protectors, the peace builders, and the backbone of continuity during crisis. And so we have to put teachers at the center of all of our investments. And then finally, we need to reclaim the peace pillar, because peace isn't just about security. Like, peace is about equity. It's about reconciliation. It's about social cohesion. And education is one of the most powerful drivers that we have. And so I will say thank you so much to NORAG, to the entire NORAG team. Thank you to Moira, Alison, and your entire team for this incredible work. Thank you also to the speaker and contributors today. It was really a pleasure to listen to all of you. Your insights, and the different calls to action were really important. And I think, let's carry that forward as we end 2025, we enter 2026, and we continue to do our best to build an education ecosystem that is coherent and that is capable of meeting the complexity of the crises we face today. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Back to you, Moira.
Thank you so much, Faiza, for filling our bellies with fire to continue the fight as we go into the next year as well, with your inspiring words. And yes, many people in the chat also asking for us to keep the conversation going. And we certainly intend to do that, and particularly with our very, very deep partnership with INEE particularly. So to close out in the last few minutes that we have, if we can switch back to the slides, thank you. We are now officially launching, you've waited this long, the publication, the Policy Insights collection on education and the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus at 10. Now here, obviously, we're talking about 10 years of global recognition in policy of the reality of the Nexus that we have been living in for, I think pretty much as long as humanity and human societies have existed. And by clicking on this QR code, you can find the link to the online PDF, which is open access and freely available. And you will find that the 5 speakers that you have heard today are a taster of all of the richness of the contributions that are inside this publication. And we are very, very happy to have all of that content now available to everyone, and some reading over the holidays if you take holidays in the next few weeks. Certainly, we will be going forward also with a blog series. So if you have something that you would like to say on this particular topic, this publication is not the end, it's the beginning of a new conversation, a continuing conversation, a parallel conversation. There are many other conversations happening on this topic. You're very welcome to basically tell us what it is you think of inside each one of these 5 topics, or indeed challenge us to think of another key topic, or challenge us on what it is that we're saying here, because it is through these conversations that we will get to something that is truly useful. And when you go to that blog series, you'll see some pieces already in there that are very focused on teachers and peace. And that was work that was done with Kate Moriarty and Yusuf Syed. So we're very grateful for them having started those blog pieces a couple of years ago, and we are continuing them now. So please do get involved. You have the QR code there, you have the link in the chat as well. After this event, as always with our NORAG events, all participants will receive a follow-up email, and you'll have the recordings, the highlights, and a link to the publication. Do please share that among your networks and make sure that people are aware of this and all of the incredible work that people have put into the publications and the extraordinary work that is behind what is documented in this publication. And please do let us know what you think on the evaluation form. And also, we have 2 upcoming events in the sessions that we organize. The KICS Europe, MENA, Asia, and Pacific Hub has an information session on their global learning cycle. And there is, in January, we have a session on outcome-based financing and early childhood care and education. And there will be more events that we'll be communicating with you through December and into the new year. If you do want to become involved, you're very welcome to join the network. You can do that by clicking on this link here. And particularly if you are an expert in or from the Global South, please make sure that you tick the box that says, I am an expert from the Global South when you sign up for the network. And that will give you access into our South Also Knows network, which also serves as a database which is externally available. And so people can then find you. So it's not just about saying there are experts in the Global South. We have this database there specifically for you to be able to be found as an expert from the Global South. And it's a testament to all of those experts that are in the Global South that this is something that exists. And it is also an initiative of NORAG and its partners to make sure that that is communicated very, very clearly. And it only remains for me to say thank you to everyone who participated in this event today. Thank you to all of the contributors to the Policy Insights. Thank you to Alison for her leadership in the editorial work that was done. Thank you to our 5 speakers and our refugee youth contributor as well today, to Faiza, Hassan, to Lara Frugenti, to the entire NORAG communications and events team, without whom this would not have happened at all. And a special thank you to the Interagency Network for Education and Emergencies, another absolutely vital network in education and development and humanitarian affairs. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Goodbye.